Imagine a world without doors. A world where the boundary between life and death is not a deadbolt or a brick wall, but the radius of a fire's glow. Thousands of years ago, housing was not an investment. It was not an aesthetic choice. It was a desperate daily negotiation with nature. For early humans, the first home was not built, it was found. Caves, rock shelters, and makeshift huts of mammoth bone and animal hide. These primitive spaces were raw, damp, and brutally temporary. Maintenance was a matter of immediate survival, keeping the fire alive to fend off predators, patching a thatched roof before the winter rains, or moving entirely when the local game migrated. It was an existence tied directly to the pulse of the earth. But look closer at these early shelters, and you see something remarkable happen to human culture. Inside the safety of the cave, away from the terrifying expanse of the prehistoric night, humans did something they couldn't do while running from a predator. They sat down, they talked, they painted their stories on the stone. The primitive home was entirely communal. There were no private bedrooms, no individual spaces. The hearth was the singular heart of human life. By forcing us together into tight, shared spaces, our earliest shelters did something profound. They forged the very concept of family, ritual, and human language. As thousands of years bled into the medieval era, the concept of the home underwent a radical structural shift. Humanity had learned to farm, to settle, and to build. But with settlement came a new threat: other humans. In the medieval world, architecture was defined by a single word: security. For the average peasant, home was a wattle and daub cottage, a fragile framework of interwoven wooden strips slathered with mud, straw, and animal dung. For the nobility, it was towering stone walls, narrow windows, and heavy oak doors. But living in a medieval home was an exercise in constant, exhausting maintenance. Thatched roofs rotted and invited pests. Mud walls cracked under the baking summer sun and washed away in violent winter floods, requiring constant replastering. Wood warped, and perhaps worst of all, the air inside was a toxic soup of wood smoke because chimneys were a luxury few could afford. And yet, look at how this architecture shaped medieval life. The concept of privacy, as we know it today, simply did not exist. In a peasant cottage, an entire family, and often their most valuable livestock, slept, ate, and lived in a single open room. The animals provided body heat during freezing winters, but they also brought filth and disease. Even in the grand castles of the elite, the Great Hall was a multi-purpose space where lords, servants, and soldiers ate together and slept on straw mats on the floor. Culture in this era was intensely collective. Your identity was entirely bound to the household and the village. The physical structure of the home left no room for the individual. You were part of a hive, bound by shared labor, shared air, and shared survival. Then came the modern era. The Industrial Revolution introduced materials our ancestors could only dream of: mass-produced brick, structural steel, sheet glass, and reinforced concrete. Suddenly, we didn't have to adapt to the landscape. We could dominate it. The modern home is a marvel of climate-controlled, insulated engineering. It is a sealed box, disconnected from the outside world. With the flip of a switch, we command light. With the turn of a dial, we dictate the temperature. From a maintenance standpoint, the modern era fundamentally changed the game. Think of concrete, vinyl siding, drywall, and double-paned glass. These materials are engineered to resist the elements for decades with minimal intervention. We no longer spend our summers remudding our walls or our autumns rethatching our roofs. When something breaks, we call a specialist or replace a modular part. But this architectural triumph came with a hidden cost. It fundamentally rewrote human psychology. For the first time in history, the home became hyper-compartmentalized. We invented the hallway, a tool designed specifically to separate rooms and create privacy. We gave every child their own bedroom. We created dedicated spaces for cooking, sleeping, working, and bathing. We successfully engineered the communal chaos out of our lives. But in doing so, we introduced something entirely new to the human experience: profound isolation. The modern home turned inward. We moved from the communal hearth of the cave and the shared public square of the medieval village to the private fenced backyard sanctuary of the suburban grid. We gained absolute independence. but we traded away a piece of our collective soul. If we stack these three eras against one another, a strange paradox emerges regarding maintenance and ease of living. Which home is truly easier to maintain? The gut reaction is to point to the modern home. After all, a concrete foundation doesn't rot, and synthetic materials don't require the constant, seasonal rebuilding of a medieval cottage or a tribal hut. We have traded physical, exhausting labor for passive durability. But look deeper. Ancient and medieval housing, while fragile, operated on a principle of accessible simplicity. If a wattle and daub wall cracked, the materials to fix it were beneath your feet: mud, water, straw. The knowledge to repair a home belonged to everyone in the community. The system was fragile, but the human was self-reliant. The modern home, however, operates on a principle of complex dependency. Our homes are now packed with invisible, intricate nervous systems, electrical grids, plumbing lines, fiber optic cables, and automated heating systems. When a modern home fails, the average occupant is entirely helpless. You cannot fix a fried smart thermostat with mud and straw. You cannot repair a ruptured copper pipe with animal hide. The modern home is highly durable, yes, but it is also rigid. When it breaks, it requires specialized, expensive supply chains and technical expertise. We have traded the physical exertion of daily upkeep for the financial burden of systemic maintenance. We don't maintain our homes with our hands anymore. We maintain them with our bank accounts. We shape our buildings, and afterwards, our buildings shape us. When we look back at the grand arc of human housing, we are looking at the story of our own changing desires. We began in the cave, seeking nothing but raw survival, entirely bound to nature and to each other. We moved into the medieval cottage, sacrificing comfort for security, bound tightly to our communities by the very limits of our walls. And finally, we arrived in the modern home, the ultimate monument to individual freedom, comfort, and privacy. Every step forward solved a physical problem, but created a cultural one. By making our homes easier to live in, by insulating ourselves from the rain, the cold, and our neighbors, we inadvertently insulated ourselves from the shared human friction that creates deep culture. We no longer hear the breathing of our community through the walls. We no longer gather around a singular fire because we each have a heater in our own private room. Perhaps the challenge of the future is not building stronger concrete, smarter appliances, or lower maintenance walls. Perhaps the true challenge is figuring out how to bring the warmth of the ancient hearth back into the modern grid. Because a house is just an engineering solution to keep out the rain, but a home will always be the place where we discover what it means to be human. And the search for that place never truly ends. For the past century, we chased materials that promised to defeat time. We wanted walls that would never rot, paint that would never peel, and foundations that would never shift. We turned away from wood, mud, and stone and turned toward petrochemicals, plastics, and highly processed composites. And for a while, it felt like a victory. The modern home required less daily muscle. But synthetic perfection carries a dark irony. Ancient houses were made of organic materials. They breathed. When a medieval wattle and daub wall absorbed moisture, it naturally released it back into the air. It is wrapped in plastic vapor barriers and sealed with chemical caulking. Because our modern structures are so tightly sealed to maintain temperature, any trapped moisture becomes a breeding ground for toxic mold, hidden invisibly behind our smooth drywall. Furthermore, our modern materials do not decay, they become permanent waste. When a modern suburb is demolished or remodeled, millions of tons of non-biodegradable drywall, fiberglass, and toxic adhesives are dumped into the earth. We thought we were building homes that were easier to maintain. In reality, we were just pushing the maintenance costs onto the planet and onto our own health. The air inside a modern, tightly sealed home is often statistically more polluted than the air outside. We built the perfect sanctuary and accidentally trapped ourselves inside a synthetic bubble. This realization has triggered a quiet revolution. Architects and builders around the globe are doing something unexpected. They are looking backward. We are entering an era of the great relearning. What are we? Today, high-end sustainable architectural firms are abandoning synthetic insulation and returning to hempy secrete, a mixture of hemp herds and lime that naturally regulates humidity and absorbs carbon dioxide from the air. In parts of Europe and America, communities are experimenting with modern cob and rammed earth construction. These are the exact same principles used in the ancient and medieval worlds, but updated with contemporary engineering. Why are we going back? Because these ancient materials possess a form of passive intelligence that modern plastics can never match. Thick earth and stone walls act as a natural thermal mass. They absorb the brutal heat of the day and slowly radiate it inward during the freezing night, reducing the need for massive energy-guzzling HVAC system. When these walls eventually crack, they don't require expensive, toxic chemical patches. They require earth. They require the very ground they stand on. We are discovering that the ultimate form of low maintenance isn't a material that lasts forever without us. It's a material that coexists with us. But the shift isn't just physical. It is cultural. Just as we are rethinking the materials of our walls, we are rethinking the isolation inside them. The hyper-compartmentalized, lonely suburban layout of the late 20th century is starting to fracture. Human beings are communal creatures. We survived the harsh prehistoric winters because we were forced to huddle around a single fire. We maintained deep tribal bonds because the medieval longhouse left no room for secrets. When the modern era eliminated that forced friction, it satisfied our desire for privacy, but starved our need for connection. Now, the fastest growing trend in urban planning is co-housing intentional communities where individuals own private, compact living spaces, but share massive communal kitchens, dining halls, workshops, and gardens. It is a deliberate echo of the ancient cave and the medieval village, retrofitted for the 21st century. It allows a person to close their door when they need solitude, but step immediately into a shared human experience when they open it. We are finally learning that a healthy culture requires a balance. We need the fortress to protect our individuality, but we need the hearth to sustain our humanity. From the damp stone of the prehistoric cave to the smoky timber of the medieval cottage to the sterile climate-controlled grid of the modern smart home, our shelters have always been a mirror of our souls. We spent thousands of years running away from the elements, trying to build a barrier thick enough to keep nature out. And we succeeded. We built a world where the weather is a choice and where privacy is absolute. But the story of housing doesn't end with a perfectly sealed, maintenance-free smart home. Because a house is never just a collection of wood, concrete, and wire. It is an ongoing experiment in how we choose to live. As we look to the future, the most advanced homes will not be the ones with the most complex technology or the most indestructible plastics. They will be the ones that understand the ancient truths. The ones that use the earth gently, that breathe naturally, and that bring people together rather than driving them apart. We will always keep building. We will always keep refining our walls. But no matter how advanced our architecture becomes, we will always be that same primitive creature. Looking for a safe place to sit by the fire, tell our stories, and wait out the storm. Because a house is just an engineering solution to keep out the rain. But a home will always be the place where we discover what it means to be human. And the search for that place never truly ends. Because in the end, the perfect home isn't the one that insulates us from the world. It's the one that connects us to it.